The emergence of Yahweh as one of the major deities of the ancient and modern world is a historical tale as surprising as it was accidental. Originally a relatively minor regional storm and warrior god, Yahweh would become the state deity of the ancient Israelite and Judahite polity before undergoing significant mutations to simply become God for billions of people the world over. But in that process, something truly astounding occurs. Yahweh goes from simply being a god among many other gods to simply being God, the God of what we now know as monotheism. Just how did Yahweh become God? Following up on my first video exploring the origins of Yahweh, in this episode I want to trace out the origins of Yahwistic monotheism. And, as we'll see, the emergence of monotheism in any form was certainly not the inevitable theological destiny of Yahwism. But what are the origins of Yahwistic monotheism, and to what degree was the religion of ancient Israel ever really monotheistic at all? If you're interested in magic, hermetic philosophy, alchemy, Kabbalah, or the history of the occult, or just arcane dimensions of religiosity, make sure to subscribe here to Esoterica and check out my other content on topics in religious esotericism. Also, if you want to support this work of providing accessible, scholarly, free content on topics in esotericism here on YouTube, I'd hope you consider supporting my work over at my Patreon. You can take a look at maybe a one-time donation via PayPal. You can use the super thanks option below the video, or you can pick up some of our cool black metal merch. Think about making some Yahweh black metal merch. Yahweh's pretty metal from time to time. But now, let's turn to how a minor regional warrior storm god, a god among gods, became simply God, eventually the God of monotheism. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. So, summarizing a bit from my first episode on Yahweh, which would probably be helpful to watch before this one, you can check it out in the card above, what the earliest Israelite and archaeological evidence suggests is that Yahweh was not an indigenous Canaanite god. That pantheon is in fact very well attested in Bronze Age Ugaritic myth cycles with no sign of Yahweh. He's just not there. Yet. However, the Israelites appear into history in the 13th century, and Yahweh is attested as their national god by the mid-9th century Misha Stele, although in that case it's where Yahweh's been defeated and some stuff has been stolen. But anyway, Yahweh's there. The more archaic strata of Israelite literature preserved in the Hebrew Bible seems to stress Yahweh as a thunderstorm god, not a Mediterranean storm god, and a warrior god, a raiding god associated with the region around Mount Seir in what is now southern Jordan and northwestern Saudi Arabia. This deity was eventually imported into the cult center at Shiloh, probably through caravan trade based on the earliest data from the earliest Israelite poetry. With the power vacuum of the Bronze Age collapse and the relatively inaccessibility of the Judean highlands to a large imperial army, arose state-like polities for whom Yahweh was an important, though not the only deity. Over time, Yahweh was merged with the various Ugaritic fatherly god, specifically El, before being assimilated and conflicting with the Canaanite storm deity Baal. The northern Israelite and southern Judahite cults would develop with some independence from one another, and whether they were ever connected into a united early monarchy is debatable. The northerners were much more comfortable, even enthusiastically syncretistic and iconographical, with the southerners, while perhaps comfortable with Yahweh along with a consort, Asherah, were seemingly a bit less syncretistic and less comfortable with representations of Yahweh, a position sometimes referred to as aniconism. That is to say, they don't like representations of their God. But Again, the data is all over the place. The general theological disposition of the region was probably a form of Yahwistic henotheism. That is to say, Yahweh is our God, even if other gods exist. My dad can beat up your dad. Or even Yahweh monolaters, though that does seem to be a minority position until the Babylonian exile beginning in the 6th century. In short, Yahweh is imported into this region of ancient Israel, undergoes a process of integration with the local pantheon before emerging as the national god, worshipped to varying degrees among other deities, from the Canaanite gods, various astral deities, the Queen of Heaven, and other regional deities that come and go. How then, from this theological situation, does the trajectory towards monotheism take shape? And that's going to be a big deal of what we'll be studying in this episode. But first, what do I mean by monotheism? Simply put, I take monotheism to be a theological or philosophical position that affirms the existence of one and only one God, thus denying ontological status to the other gods, or significantly demoting them, or demonizing them, or something like that. That deity is typically responsible for the creation of the world, the natural and ethical laws that govern it, and the fate of that world. Of course, the contours of all of that, especially in a developing theological system couched largely in poetic language, is going to lack any, analytic rigor for my philosophy people out there, and it's going to remain relatively vague and inchoate, and especially in its earliest forms. If we find just such conditions in the primitive monotheism of the Hebrew Bible, we shouldn't at all be surprised. But should we expect to find monotheism of any form in the Hebrew Bible at all? Well, yeah, of course. We all think it's there. One camp argues that monotheism goes back to Abraham and Moses, with the biblical text being the inerrant word of God, and it's been monotheistic from the beginning because there's just one God, objectively. Another argues that no monotheism is to be found in the Hebrew Bible at all. At most, we find henotheism, or Yahweh monolatry, with monotheistic rhetoric, something found in clearly polytheistic cultures like ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, allowing us, following philosophical and theological developments of centuries later, to interpolate such positions back into the theologies of the Hebrew Bible.